Okay, my pen stopped working properly, but I will do my best to talk through this text. I can't even remember what I tried on the first go. We'll start off with the vocab. This final section of the letter has a few words that are either repeated from earlier in the text or feel a bit new, but isn't too bad. It does give you a slightly different feel to the rest of the letter, but it builds on ideas you've already met. First of all, you get the verb aiteo, which means I ask. And you get that repeated a few times, but also picked up in verse 15 with the noun aitema. You've seen that ma nouns are the product of a verb, and therefore this is going to be the request, the thing that comes from the asking. Then in verse 17, adikia, you get that alpha privative on the front of dik, giving you injustice, the thing that is unjust. You see genao repeated in verse 18. You've had that a couple of times in this text, to be born. My pen's given up again. I apologise, you'll have to listen. Then in verse 20, you get the verb herko, I have come. This is a slightly unusual verb in Greek. As you can see from the kappa, it has a sense that it might be perfect underlying it, and therefore it gives you the present tense, but with this sense of having arrived there. It's defective, it's really weird, but it's quite helpful. In fact, in later Greek, it replaces the irregular aorist of erchomai to give you a slightly more obvious form. You then get dianoia, that's something that goes dia, through your nous, your mind, and therefore it's a thought, followed by the adjective alerthinos, which occurs 3 times in verse 20. Alerthinos means true. You know the adjective alerthes, but it's quite common to create these new adjectives on a strong adjective model, inos, rather than the slightly awkward third declension vowel stem of alerthes. And finally, at the end of verse 21, eidolon is a new word, idol, even if it's an obvious one. Once you've sorted that out, looking at the structure of this, it's lots of things you should recognise already. I'm really hoping my pen starts working again, but in case it doesn't, you'll just have to listen. You get a number of uses of the subjunctive, but there are only 2 variations here. In verse 13, hine eiderte. Verse 14, ean aitormatha. Verse 15, ean oidamen. And then ean aitormatha. 16, ean ider. And then at the end of the verse, hine erotese. Before finally, verse 20, hine ginor scormen. You've got a mixture of indefinite conditionals, ean, and purpose clauses, hine. Some of the issues of the subjunctive do crop up. If you look at ean oidamen, you can see that that lengthened a doesn't change, and you can't see that it's subjunctive just from looking at it. But ean tells you that it really needs to be. Ean ider in verse 16 might also strike you as a bit unusual. Ider, the subjunctive of eidon, it's lost its augment and then gained its subjunctive endings. So that's an irregular one you might want to look out for. You've also got a load of hotties in this text. A hottie in verse 13, 14, 2 in 15, 1 in 19, and 1 in 20. 18, 19, 20, you can see that they all follow, in fact 15 as well, you can see they follow oidamen. So there's a real thrust of this, that we know that, we know that, we know that. There's a structure of giving an announcement of what the content of the letter is to look back on it in this text. That pas ho participle, so every person who does something structure, is much less common here, but you do still have 2. So verse 18, pas hogegenermenos, alla hogenerthes. You do have 2 participles from genao still coming up here as subjects. You've got a few of those pronouns coming up. So we start off with the tauta, and you've got akenes in verse 16, but it's not littered with the demonstrative pronouns like the previous verse. One more word of vocab that you might need. My pen seems to have started working again. So katai in verse 19 comes from the verb kamai. This is another defective one. It means lie. So as in lie down. And like oida, it doesn't have all its tenses, so K my uses the perfect form for the present. I will highlight a few of the things I was talking about now. Subjunctives coming up in yellow, so you can go back and keep an eye on being able to see them while my pen works. And I will then put the hotties in another colour, pink, shall we? Because it definitely provides you with a structure to this text again. Oidemen hottie, oidemen hottie, oidemen hottie. So if you add all those things together, you can see a real flow to this text with your participles being used as nouns. That hopefully will allow you, once you've got that flow of if clauses and purpose clauses, and then indirect explanations of that, will allow you to make sense of it without too much trouble. Finally, I will just mark out some of those pronouns so you keep an eye on them. You've got a houtos, demonstrative being used of theos. Theos is often described as a kainos because he's the one who's remote, but actually here houtos is allowing you to point to God more directly. Tauta, I wrote these things, it's your generic thing. Hauta estin hepere, so this is the freedom of speech. That quite common usage of the pronoun to introduce something with verb to be in a preparatory kind of way. And then akanes here in verse 16. About this we do not say, about that we do not say. And it's feminine, therefore it's going to be referring back to hamartia. If you think about what the most recent feminine has been that it can be referring back to.